the Evolution Security Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm here with Eric and Aaron. How you guys doing?
Hey fellas, how's it going, man? Good to see you guys.
Doing good.
Yeah, man, it's been a busy few weeks, but we've managed to find another awesome guest. It really shocks me how the caliber of guests that we get to have on. It's really a privilege to talk to these guys. Don't you think so, Eric?
Man, I love it. It's been an incredible journey. This short period we've been doing this, about a year and a half, almost 2 years now. And man, it's been amazing. The support that we've gotten out of our guests alone has been incredible. The amount of information we get to pull out of them, the amount of learning we get, man, it's just been amazing.
Yes, it is incredible. I'm honored every show for sure.
Nice. Yeah, we're kind of heading back to what I would call our core and roots here, because this is a guest we've been wanting to have on for a while, and I quite honestly I don't know why we haven't had him on sooner.
No kidding.
We go through the list of folks that we have at our disposal as we can, and Mr. Larry Lindenman is one of the early guys that is part of the Shivworks Collective, and you'll hear in this interview some of the cool stuff about back in the early days before it was really formed into what it is now, and you'll hear that common theme with some of these forums that the guys grew up on, and it's just like it's neat because we also get to get a little bit of a history of where these guys came from.
Yeah, actually, Brian, I'm pretty amazed that until we did the pre-show, I didn't realize how much background Larry Lindenman and I had. I mean, he used to train at my old gym, Gibson's Martial Arts, which we'll talk a little bit about in the interview. But man, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know how much connection we actually had. So that was really cool to hear as well.
Yeah, well, we're not going to waste a bunch of time up front. I think we're going to jump right in, and this is a little different than some of our normal guests that talk a lot more about the shooting and combatives. We're going to get, which definitely Larry's involved with, but we're going to get into some of the physical fitness stuff too in this interview. So, looking forward to it, and I hope you guys like it.
Well, hey, real quick, guys, before we get to that interview, I want to remind our listeners of the event we have coming up with Cecil Birch here July 16th through 18th at Clinch Martial Arts here in Tulsa. Go to iacombatives.com. That stands for Immediate Action Combatives, iacombatives.com. Look there on his seminar schedule for more information so you can sign up. There's going to be a lot of cool people there. It's just going to be a blast, as Cecil alluded to on his show a couple of shows ago, that it's turned into a mini seminar. So there's a lot that's going to be going on there. So you should get signed up before there are not any slots left. And then just one more thing. Everybody, please go ahead and go out to iTunes and give us a rating and a review. Just taking that little bit of time really helps us out a lot to reach other listeners that want to learn the type of information that you enjoy. So please help us out there. Give us a rating, review, and also share the show with your good friends.
Well, we would like to welcome Larry Lindenman to the show. How you doing tonight, Larry?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. And of course, we should have the other guys say hello too, man.
Hey, what's up, Larry? Glad to have you on the show, brother.
Hey, Larry, Aaron here. Glad to have you.
Excellent. Should be a good time.
Yeah, no, we've been excited about having you on actually, because you are one of these core people of this thing that we espouse and teach and train in, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But just to get everybody on the same page, because we follow you, but maybe everyone else doesn't. Why don't you just go ahead and take a few minutes and give us a background about where you come from and how you've come to be into the person that you are today as far as training and all of the things that you do.
Yeah, it's funny because now I have 3 people who follow me, so that's great. That's great. Awesome.
With your mom, it's 4.
So I was I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and was an athlete throughout my life. I competed in swimming, wrestling, did a little cross country running, did gymnastics, which was really actually pretty pivotal in a lot of areas. I actually did the rings. That was my specialty. Tall, 6 feet tall for that. It made it look good, but it was just hell on hands and shoulders and everything. But it was pretty pivotal in my growth as an athlete, because gymnastics is all about awareness in space, about what you're doing when you're moving, and so really good foundation for what came later on, which was training martial arts. After I graduated high school, I actually did a semester as a college athlete, and they changed the rules for specialties in gymnastics, where it was only going to be all around people who did all the different apparatus, and so I ended up I could have stayed on. I ended up just cutting because it just didn't work into my schedule and work at actually passing classes, because you were training 4 hours a day. And started out as a business major in college, which sucked, and because what business was, I had no idea. I was a kid. It was 1980. Had no idea what I wanted to do, and always had an interest in sports and sports science, and realized they had a sports science program, an exercise physiology program in my university. And so I sort of had a miserable first semester and switched majors, and ended up getting my degree in exercise physiology. Ended up working as a lab or a graduate assistant in the exercise physiology lab doing testing. Did a little internship at a hospital in Chicago that did exercise testing. So they did body fat testing. They did treadmill testing, Vo2 Max, and it was really actually really advanced program for the time. And we gave exercise prescriptions afterwards. So I saw hundreds and hundreds of people. I ended up getting a job in that hospital. Kind of going back into college after I left the gymnastics team, I was looking for something to do, a physical outlet. I ended up meeting this guy. His name is Mike Knopf, and became a real close friend of mine. He did a martial art that I had never heard of before. It was called Kali, and I'd always been interested in martial arts. I did Taekwondo when I was a kid, and that was really the only thing we had in the 70s. You saw the Karate Kid, right? So you kind of know, kind of see what was out there at the time. And we didn't really, so Mike had trained with Insano, and Mike was he was kind of a genius in that physical realm. Really knew it well. So I had an interesting experience where probably the first 9 months that I trained in Kali, Filipino Kali, the stick fighting, I never saw anybody actually do it. So it was just me and this guy, Mike Knopf, and we trained, and there was no video at the time. There was no YouTube. There was nothing. So I actually was training, and the only representation I had of what I was doing was my mental model of what I was doing. It was all internal. I never saw anybody else do it, which is kind of an odd way to learn if you think about it. And the reality is that really back in the day, that's pretty much, you might see other people, other training partners or other people train, but the reality is that you really didn't get a big, you don't have the advantages that you have today. So I met Inosanto, and I had I think I had a knack for the stick fighting portion of it. I was a pretty decent athlete. I was able to pick up movement pretty quick. I think it was just I had a good movement vocabulary already. I was able to do a lot of different things just because of the gymnastics. I was able to do a lot of different things that allowed me to advance fairly rapidly. We would get little snippets of what Inosanto was doing, and then we would bring it back and we'd work on it. And a lot of times we'd be wrong. So we'd work on something for 6 months, and then we see Inosanto again, and we'd go, "Hey, look what we were working on." And he'd say, "Okay, yeah, that's great, but change this, change that, change this." It was a great way to learn. I mean, it was actually an excellent way to learn. And it was funny because I was talking, after graduating college, I was talking to Inosanto about moving out to California. And he actually encouraged me not to do it. He said the problem is when you have an instructor there, you always have somebody who can answer your questions. And so he kind of encouraged me to stay in the Chicago area, which I did. I was an instructor under him for a number of years. Worked in hospitals doing this exercise testing. And after a bit of time, realized that the hospital that I was working in that did the exercise testing actually went under. I ended up getting another job in a clinic in another hospital. It sucked. I became an administrator. I was making decent money, but I just hated the job. And all I was doing was thinking about martial arts while I was working, and kind of figuring out new things that I could do. And around that time, I was teaching a kind of storied martial arts academy in Chicago. It was called Degerberg Academy. It's still around actually today. But Mike Knopf had moved on and moved to Texas, and so I was looking for a training partner, and ended up one of my students asked me, kind of did the Kwai Chai King thing from Kung Fu, and kept on asking me to teach him. Kept on asking me. I finally said okay. So we started training together. His name is Ron Balicki, and he made quite a name for himself. He ended up doing what I asked to do. He moved out to California, and then ended up marrying Diana Inosanto. So Dan is his father-in-law, and he's kind of the heir apparent now to the Inosanto method, which is pretty interesting. And I continued my journey in Filipino martial arts, and kind of realized that doing the exercise testing and prescriptions really kind of sucked. Always wanted to. I was drawn to warrior type of stuff, and I thought, well, hey, how about FBI? I applied at the time. They were going through a kind of a hiring freeze. Somebody told me, why don't you apply for the Illinois State Police? Never really thought of it. Didn't really know what troopers did, because I lived in Chicago, in an urban area, and troopers were on the interstates, but I was mostly on the surface streets, so I never really saw them. So kind of blindly applied. 5,000 people, ended up getting a slot in the academy. Had no idea what it was going to be like. And it was paramilitary. So it was 6 months of State Police Academy. They recognized my martial arts skills fairly quickly. One of the guys who worked or who had taken a seminar with Inosanto was a defensive tactics instructor. He knew me. I didn't know him, but he knew of me from being at the seminar. So that word traveled around fairly quickly. So they made me do martial arts demonstrations and stuff like that. I think it's funny because I was a graduate assistant. I worked in a hospital, and I was a hospital administrator, and I think I got more use out of my martial arts skill in the state police than I did with any of my education, which is kind of interesting. Became a DT instructor. Actually rewrote the defensive tactics manual for the state police, the Illinois State Police. Got on the SWAT team in 1990 and did 10 years as a SWAT operator, a squad leader, and an instructor for SWAT. Had some great mentors in that arena. Worked undercover. After I worked the road for 5 years, and then I transitioned to investigations. Off of a homicide investigation, then I worked kind of like a TDY, like a temporary duty assignment. I ended up working a homicide investigation, and that led into a permanent slot in investigations. SWAT team went full time. Decided to end up. I ended up going or staying in investigations. Ended up working in a undercover unit for 5.5 years. Probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, I was involved in CrossFit. When it first came out, nobody knew what it was. Nobody ever heard of it. And Greg Glassman, who's the founder of CrossFit, invited me to go out to California and go to a certification, which I did. And he asked me about this guy. He's like, "Hey, I want to bring somebody in to do, like, I don't know, defensive tactics, knife fighting. You ever heard of Shivworks?" And I said, "Nope, never heard of it." And he goes, "Hey, look it over, see if you like it." Looked it over. This is back in the day where there was just, kind of these weird, like, photos of Craig Douglas with his face blotted out and wearing dad jeans, faded dad jeans, and boots, and and I'm like, what the hell is this stuff? It was actually it was amusing looking back at kind of my initial reaction. I don't know exactly how I ended up. I know that I started to frequent TPI, which was Craig's kind of forum, and when I started posting, I started realizing that my experience in real life did not coincide extremely well with my martial experience. So when I got into like brawls in the street, it was completely different than what what it looked like when I was training, and there was this huge disconnect. There was also a huge disconnect between firearms training, defensive tactics training, driving. So all the tactical skills that we taught were completely disconnected. So you got, competition shooters teaching shooting. You had guys who like martial arts teaching defensive tactics. You had dudes who like driving teaching driving. There was never really kind of a crossover between any of those instructors. Nobody really had that complete skill set. I mean, they did, but they were really good at one thing, and the rest of the things they kind of sucked at, and nobody had kind of this overriding tactical knowledge. So connecting with Craig, I was on that forum when a lot of the information was still being developed. A lot of what we see today in ECQC and was still being developed by Craig, and so Cecil and I began to talk. We on each other. William April and I began to talk. Me and Chris Fry, I went out with Cecil and Chris Fry. We hung out in New York together, and so the five of us with Paul Sharp sort of were always interacting with each other, and then that's what kind of became that Shivworks Collective. So
here's something I want to point out, and we haven't met personally, but I've been to ECQC and I've known Eric and Aaron, and I've been following this stuff for a while. And this theme that keeps coming back is all these guys that were hanging out on TPI.
Yeah.
And like half of our guests. And I'm like so frustrated that I'm out there on some freaking nerd forum. I'm on the wrong forum. I mean, that's like where all this stuff came from. It's so cool to hear this history though, because that's where you guys got together and started sharing ideas.
Yeah, I mean, Claude Werner was on there, Tom Gibbons is on there. There was a lot, most of the people that that you kind of know in that realm were on TPI, and everybody was sort of hashing out information, kind of talking through the information. Now, I want to be really clear with this. Craig Douglas developed this information through thousands of hours of working with people. We had, we certainly had input in different ways, but Craig was really the main driver of this information, and the development of the information as well. Everybody's got their little niches that they've sort of gravitated towards, but as kind of the overriding philosophy was developed by Craig. And there's been discussions lately on Facebook or whatever about it's just amusing to kind of see people talk about the different instructors and what. And I remember the time when Craig was doing the Traveling Roadshow and he was bringing 5 fist helmets and he had 6 students, and there was a lot of lean years there, but it was this constant going out there and reiterating and seeing shit that worked and seeing stuff that didn't work, and getting to the point where he started to saw some commonalities in what was working and try to put a name to what it was. So what actually worked, and this kind of led to what you see in ECQC now. It's still It's still developing. It's never going to be a situation where we're going to say, okay, we've got the curriculum. It's always open ended. If somebody comes in with a better answer, well, then we're going to listen to that answer. But it's always open ended. But bottom line is that it started out with like Kali and World War II combatants. We all sort of had a very similar background. And in the 80s, if you were looking for cutting edge, that Inosanto method, Kali, John Fan, that was it. I mean, that was cutting edge at the time. I think that psychologically it allowed for UFC to come in, certainly not with the larger population, but in terms of like martial artists, that philosophy of research your own experience, absorb it as useful, reject it as useless, and make everything uniquely your own. It sort of opened that door where most martial arts were siloed, and Inosanto was sort of bringing together all these different martial arts. So I think psychologically that primed the pump for mixed martial arts to kind of come into the U.S. and then be developed.
Well, Larry, I'd like to comment, Eric here. We spoke pre-show, and of course, I've spoke to you about finding you on TPI. Frankly, it's interesting how close a lot of our backgrounds. Now, I do not hold a candle to you guys in the collective as far as experience goes, but it's amazing all of us that came from the Inosanto background. And it was frankly Mike Brown. I met him at Gibson's Martial Arts in Tulsa, as we spoke about before. He's also the person that introduced me to Craig Douglas, and actually it happened by him saying, "Hey, you need to join Total Protection Interactive, or TPI," and so I joined that forum in 2005. And I remember thinking, man, this is the holy grail of information, and there's no bullshit on here. Like, I mean, you even had to have somebody recommend you, or I guess give you the bona fides, should say, to join the forum. And so that's frankly where I started learning about you and reading a lot of what you posted. And I kind of wish that TPI was still flourishing. It just seems like forums are just kind of losing their luster. But yeah, I just wanted to throw out those that gratitude is like a lot of the writing that was on TPI. Some of the best stuff that I read was coming from you. So it's kind of amazing to me that it's taken this long for us to hook up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, it's I certainly leveraged. So when it came to firearms, I I certainly know my way around a firearm. I took um, a bunch of classes. I was a SWAT instructor, so I certainly knew about firearms. But clearly, there were people who were much more well versed in firearms than I was. So I kind of stayed in my lane and tried to stay away from any firearms information. And I mostly stuck. I sort of specialized in, because I had this background in exercise physiology. I'd done, probably thousands of tests in exercise prescriptions by the time I went on TPI, and kind of had a experience with CrossFit and Greg Glassman, and and so that's sort of where I'm like, okay, I'm probably the only person on this forum that has a deep background in that. Even though I certainly felt competent in the other realms, this was something that I felt that I could offer that other people really weren't. I mean, Paul has a very solid background as an athlete in training, but in terms of the physiology behind why things work and how things work, certainly I at least I had the background for it. So yeah, so it became pretty interesting. Just that forum thing. It was a great. At the time, it was great. I mean, it was a great way to exchange information, and as long as you have the right people on there, and as long as you don't, idiots, and every group you're going to have, some issues, but um, there was a lot of exchange of information, and there was a lot of development of information, certainly, and that all got distilled down into PCQC and Amos, and of Craig's offerings.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Tenacore. So I'll ask the audience members out there, have you ever wondered if you were in an actual confrontation and your pistol's in the holster and you get into a gun grappling situation and somebody's trying to rip your gun out of the holster? Do you know for certain that your holster could stand up to that kind of pressure? The reason I'm asking that question, because Tenacore, Jeff and his folks over there, they know for sure because they bring it to classes like ECQC and do gun grappling and do the retention techniques and prove that holster or those holsters are gonna hold together. So again, I asked that question out there. If you're not sure, you probably need to find out. And if it's not a quality holster, I really recommend you go and check out Tenacore at tenacore.com and use EvoSec at checkout for 10% off. And you can guarantee that your holster will last through a situation like that. So make that happen. Well, and Larry, I think I would like to hit on your physical fitness acumen real quick. Because again, that was something I took away from your writings on there that was outstanding. I'd kind of like to hit on LSD and stroke volume here in just a second. But as a primer, speaking of firearms, we all love our firearms. It's one of the most important aspects of self-defense, even though it's a lot lower on the the priorities than a lot of folks think. A lot of folks don't really think physical fitness is that important, that are running around carrying a gun.
Yeah.
And I'd like to quote you. I heard you say on a interview one time regarding physical fitness, is that you can't shoot a heart attack in the face. And I love that line, and I use it quite often with attribution to you. But I'd like you to hit on the importance of physical fitness as it relates to self-defense.
Yeah. So Aaron and Brian and Eric, I mean, I'll ask you guys. You guys took ECQC. What was the first thing on your mind after your first evolution? What was that first kind of thought on your mind besides "holy shit"? Beyond that, what were you thinking?
So I'll answer.
My
I'll answer
forehead
first.
hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. My forehead has a hole in it. Beyond that, what were there?
I need to work on my conditioning.
Yeah. The first time somebody rolls jiu-jitsu, the other thing I didn't say is that I'm a black belt, Carlson Gracie Jr. black belt, and I teach jiu-jitsu now. So
absolutely, we were going to talk about that.
I retired from state police, and I do executive protection now, and I teach jiu-jitsu. That's kind of my two things that I do now. But the similar thing in jiu-jitsu. The first time somebody rolls, they're like, "Oh man, I need to get in shape." And that's probably the most common thing we heard from people in ECQC is that they need to get in shape. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. I mean, I think a lot of it is just inefficiency. And, frankly, I think some of it's probably the adrenal dump.
Absolutely.
But clearly there were a lot of guys, I was just talking to Craig yesterday, as a matter of fact, and we were talking about how the class, the student structure has changed a lot in ECQC. A lot more military, a lot more police, a lot more jiu-jitsu guys. Back in the day, it was gun guys, and it was a huge wake-up call for gun people, because now we're talking about, okay, well, most encounters are going to happen close. You can make distance, but most encounters start close. And if they start close and you go for that weapon in free space, there's a real good chance that person's not going to want to get shot, and they're going to stop you from drawing that weapon. Well, they're going to reach out and they're going to grab you, and it becomes grappling. And it starts as vertical, and it could go horizontal. And in that struggle, in that fight, if you're not fit, you're not going to survive it. If you go over your anaerobic threshold, and we could talk about that, but if you go over your anaerobic threshold, you're basically going to be non-functional after 20 seconds. And if you're non-functional, that other person could pretty much do whatever they want. Now, beyond that, there's a guy, Dr. Peter Attia, and I love his verbiage, and he talks about health span versus lifespan, and he says, I'm not all that interested in increasing lifespan. I mean, if we could get a couple years, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that's great. He goes, what I'm interested in is increasing health span. So I'm interested in increasing your health so that you could do whatever you want to do when you're let's say in your late 80s, and then when it's time to go, that drops off extremely quickly. What we're really seeing, I mean, to be completely honest, what we're seeing now is we're seeing people starting to drop off in their late 30s. So they take a desk job, they start gaining a pound a year. By the time they're in their 30s, they're 20 pounds overweight. They're pre-diabetic if they're not full-blown type 2 diabetes. They're insulin resistant. They're out of breath. They're developing cardiovascular disease, and they're in their late 30s or early 40s when this is all happening. And I had a guy come up to me in a seminar one time. He had lost a lot of weight, and he said, "Hey, I listened to a podcast you were on, and basically you said, and I'm fairly blunt, and basically I said, why are you worried about how fast your par times are shooting, when you're probably going to die of a heart attack. As a matter of fact, the chance of you dying from a heart attack is way by a magnitude of thousands of times more than you getting shot in the face by a terrorist or a bad guy. So if you really care about self-defense, if you really care about surviving, you probably need to think about your health first. All that other stuff is great and it's fun and it's a hobby, but being healthy and extending that health span, way more important than all this other stuff, in my opinion.
No, for sure. And I mean, I don't mean to just poke fun at the internet warriors, but you see these guys in their chest rig and their plate carrier and they're 75 to literally 150 pounds overweight.
Yeah.
Bro, you're not going to make it to the end of the driveway. I mean, that's the truth. You're going to be out of breath. Your heart's probably going to fail and you're going to be laying in the ditch 100 yards from your house. So in whatever scenario it was you were preparing for anyway. But that's what got me into CrossFit and then eventually into weightlifting and into jiu-jitsu was when the doctor said, your cholesterol's a little high, it's not that bad, but I'm a little worried about your blood pressure and we're going to put you on medication for it. And that was the wake-up call. And that doesn't work for a lot of people. A lot of people just take the pills and go, okay, fine.
Yep.
For whatever reason, I was ready to stop being that person. And it wasn't like I was obese or massively overweight, but I changed my body and my health dramatically in a 2 to 3 year period. And I'm simply not the same person.
Yep. Yeah. Huge. Yeah. That's, I mean, that probably, and that becomes the base for everything, right? So, that becomes the foundation for building, a self-defense system, what happens in case of emergency system, it all starts with that foundation. And, it's, there's some complications to it. We could get into it if you want, but ultimately it's exercise and nutrition really. And that's a good foundation. And certainly there's specific training that you need to do. I mean, you don't get better at ECQC by going to ECQC once a year. You have to work on some other things, and you don't get better at ECQC by lifting weights. A common thing we see with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people is when they're white belts, they're looking at people and they're like, "Ooh, that guy's jacked. Ooh, he's going to be tough." Or that guy's really big, or he looks strong. And after once you become a blue belt, you're really not worried about that anymore because it has nothing to do with the way a person looks. It has everything to do with their skill level. So, the computer geek is destroying the bodybuilder. So you start to learn that skill comes into play. But all things equal, the stronger person, if you've got equal skill, or even if you're a little bit under that person, if you've got strength and if you've got good cardio, you're gonna dominate in that exchange. So why not have it all? And on the other end of it, why not have that health span be increased as well?
No, and I agree with what you're saying there because I've got blue belts that I train with, and they're like a little concerned, and I'm a white belt, one stripe. I'm new to this, and they're a little concerned because I have a substantial amount of upper body strength.
Yeah.
But all they have to do is calm down and use their technique, and they can smoke me every time.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, it's a balance, right? So it's a balance between your skill training and we've got a lot of stuff to do. We certainly if you're not doing this for a living, there's a lot of extra things. I mean, if you're going to be dry firing and you're going to be doing cardio and you're going to weight lift and you're going to do jiu-jitsu and then you're going to sprinkle in some ECQC stuff and you're like, hey, I need to draw a knife every once in a while so I could still do that. When you're doing all this and you're not doing it for a living, that's a lot of stuff to do. It's a lot of stuff to do. So, so when you're thinking it through, one of the things that you kind of want to think about is that health span, or that longevity as an athlete. Can you maintain what you're doing for the rest of your life, rather than have a great 3 years and then drop off the cliff.
Hey everyone, I'm going to take just a second to talk about Origin Maine. Origin Maine is a U.S. company employing U.S. workers and making U.S. products. And again, we talk about them every week, but the reason we do it is because it's products that we believe
Delish.
in. And this week, I just want to highlight, I've got some more Sour Apple Sniper Go drink coming, and that stuff is awesome. Yeah, and it's just a little boost of caffeine, but it's got some other good stuff in there, and again, no artificial sweeteners. That's one of the things I personally have chosen to avoid in my diet. So that, and I've also got some of the Afterburner Orange coming. Good deal, Dave Burke. And very, very, I was shocked because I thought I might not like that flavor, and I do love it. But Origin also has an entire line of compression gear, jiu-jitsu gis, other, athletic items that you can purchase. They've got hoodies, sweatshirts, and they're making most of that stuff right here, man, and it's really cool. So again, I can't say enough good about their products, and I use them every day. And that's not just me giving lip service. I take their supplements daily. So go check them out, originmaine.com.
Well, Larry, real quick regarding that lifespan, and you mentioned Dr. Peter Attia. Man, that guy is amazing. I've learned so much from him over the years, and he said something about that lifespan, and he kind of hit a just a couple of examples of what he wanted to make sure he could do into his later years. And one of the things he simply said was, I just like to be able to do goblet squats with a 44-pound kettlebell.
Yeah.
And of course, he speaking of cardio base and whatnot, but regarding cardio base, because you mentioned having a baseline.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really appreciated about your writings on TPI and also your website is your discussion on LSD and stroke volume. Can you talk on that for a bit and kind of give our audience an example of what that's really about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So back in the 70s and 80s, there was this big kind of running, jogging, cardio, aerobics revival, maybe not revival, but kind of the beginning of that culture of runners, of marathons, and marathons started to become popular. Fitness was equated with your cardiorespiratory fitness. There's a lot of jogging, a lot of things like that. And I think in the 90s, weightlifting started to become more popular, and weightlifters generally hate distance work. And so in looking for a solution, they ran across high intensity interval training. And then there were some studies that came out, famously the Tabata study. It was 20 seconds of work, 10 seconds of rest. And I'm sorry, 10 seconds of work, 20 seconds of rest. I forget, whatever. And I haven't really looked at it in a while, because the bottom line was that there were some great benefits to doing short, explosive bursts of work. And then CrossFit started to become popular. I believe I started to really get involved in CrossFit in 1997. So nobody knew what it was. I mean, literally nobody knew. There's 100 people that knew what CrossFit was. And Rob Wolf was one of those guys. A couple other people that you've probably heard of, Greg Everett, Annie Sakamoto. All these people were involved in CrossFit at that time. And there was this big push towards anaerobic work as being the answer. You looked at the advent of MMA in the mid 90s, and the Lions Den, and the way that they trained was all intensity all the time. And so HIIT training started to become a thing, and it sort of made sense if you looked at it from the outside and you said, hey, fighting is a high intensity sport, and therefore I need to train at high intensity. Well, the reality is that high intensity is built on an engine that consists of your heart, your lungs, and your mitochondria. And most endurance athletes, they'll train interval training, and basically scientifically, it's been found that you're going to peak your anaerobic training in about 3 weeks to a month. So, what do they do the rest of the time? Well, they do what a lot of people call it zone 2 training. Some people call it LSD training, steady distance, or basically it's training. Phil Maffetone, I think, has the best algorithm to train with, and it's essentially 180 minus your age. And there's a couple of things that you could do to manipulate that number, but if you go 180 minus your age, that pretty much puts you at your heart rate that you want to train at, and it's a pretty freaking low heart rate. So the biggest complaint with this training is that people say it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. It could be a slow jog. You're able to breathe through your nose. You don't have to breathe through your mouth. But what's been found irrefutably is that training actually creates physiologic changes that allow you to layer on anaerobic training to greater effect later on. Also, this training is really, really good for health. And then when you start to look at combat sports, what you're seeing bursts of activity interspaced by essentially LSD, essentially like low intensity type of stuff. So when two guys meet in the ring and they're boxing, they're not throwing with all they have all the time. When they're probing with the jab, when they're throwing kicks, when they're a lot of times their heart rate is well under the anaerobic threshold. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build, with LSD training, we're trying to build a huge engine, big engine. So we're trying to actually increase the chamber size of our heart, which allows us to pump more blood with each time the heart beats. The larger the chamber is, the stronger that muscle is, the more blood could be pumped, the lower your resting heart rate becomes. So it's a good the low resting heart rate is a good proxy for training. Generally, athletes should be high 40s, low 50s resting heart rate. The way you get there is by getting these adaptations with this long, steady distance training. So on Sundays, I do an hour and a half a run at a heart rate of about probably 127, 130, and I try to keep it there. If it goes up above that, I go down lower. I'll usually try to get 3 to 4 hours of this LSD training in a week. When I'm looking at doing a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition, or if it's just for whatever reason I want to change up my training, I'll do a 4-week block of sprint training. I usually do it on the Airdyne. I'll do 30 seconds with a minute and a half of rest, and just kind of interspace that. I'll do that 8 times. Sometimes I'll change it up depending. Sometimes I'll do if I'm doing a 5-minute match, like a competition with 5 minutes, I'll do 5 minutes with as much intensity as I can do, called Vo2 Max Intervals. So I'll interspace it, but I would say probably 80 to 90% of my training for cardiovascular stuff is this LSD zone 2 math training.
Well, and Larry, real quick, kind of, because I know that LSD work is boring for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I know you've recommended Joel Jameson's recommendations on that, like the road work 2.0. Can you kind of describe that for our audience members in case they struggle with doing, an hour and a half of cardio?
Yeah, and clearly, if you've never done this before, you probably don't want to go out on a jog, right? So a couple of things. One, get a heart rate monitor. The heart rate is actually a proxy for your VO2 max. It tells you basically where your oxygen consumption is, your maximal oxygen consumption is. So it's sort of a proxy for it. As your metabolic needs increase, your heart rate's going to increase. As your heart rate decreases, your metabolic needs kind of decrease. So Joel Jameson, very interesting. Probably 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago, I started pushing this on TPI. About 10 years ago, Joel Jameson started pushing it with MMA athletes and Jiu-Jitsu athletes. And, got a little bit of pushback from people who didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. And, they didn't know who he was. And all of a sudden, here's this guy who's training a number of champion UFC champions, and he kind of came up with this road work 2.0, and I don't generally do it, to be honest. I have in the past, but I just slog through a run. I just go out and run. So I just suck it up. I throw on earpods and throw on an audiobook or a podcast, and I just do it. And I actually kind of enjoy it now. Because again, you're not, people who don't enjoy running are the ones who are like really pushing that gray zone. They're like, if their math heart rate was 135, they're pushing it to 160. And so they're breathless, and it's miserable to be in that state when you're running all the time. And you're actually not getting the gains you think you're getting. So the road work 2.0 is it doesn't matter what you're doing. Your body doesn't know your heart, your mitochondria, your blood vessels. They don't know what you're doing. So you could swim, you could run, you could get on a bike, you could get on an airdyne, you could jump rope, you could do rope flow, you could box, you could shadow box, you could hit a bag, you could do whatever the hell you want, and as long as you're logging time, and I would say at least a half hour, and you could push that every once in a while to up to an hour and a half. Logging time in that heart rate zone, that zone 2, as long as you're logging the time in, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It really doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, generally when you're training, what you're looking at is you're looking to be very general at first. So using large muscle mass, so biking, running, airdyne, you're using large musculature. And then as you're starting to get closer to competition, your first couple of weeks of like an 8-week camp, you would start to take that general adaptation and make it specific. So if it was jiu-jitsu, rather than keeping your heart, let's say I was keeping my heart rate at 135. Now instead of doing it through running or getting on an airdyne, I would do it through drilling jiu-jitsu. So, I get a partner and I do knee cut passes, or I do, I just work my passing game or my guard. And I try to keep my heart rate up at 135 while doing that for an extended period of time, for maybe a half hour. So now I'm taking that general adaptation and I'm making it specific. I'm doing it specifically to grappling or to boxing or whatever your chosen sport is.
Yeah, I've certainly listened and adhered to your sport specific versus the baseline. And I would say when I'm doing baseline work, like I've got a home gym, and so for cardio machines, I've got a rower, I've got a treadmill, I've got a bike, I got a jump rope, I got a bag, and kettlebells. So I'll just do like 10 minutes of treadmill, 10 minutes of rowing, bike, and I might mix my jump rope in between, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And it lets me get through an hour worth of cardio in no time, and I actually enjoy it.
Yeah, and you're actually, there's a principle in physiology called a specific adaptation to imposed demands. So SAID, SAID, specific adaptation to imposed demands. So if you're not working your arms, you're just working your legs. Your legs are going to adapt. The mitochondria in your legs are going to adapt. You might get some general adaptation in some other muscle groups that you're working, but not the same type of adaptation you're going to get if you're boxing. It's completely different. I mean, now you're using your upper body, you're using your hips, certainly you're using your lower body, but to a much less extent. So, so by working in these different realms, certainly you're getting a much more general adaptation than you would if you were just on a stationary bike or went outside and biked or went outside and ran. So it's a great idea, and plus it helps to kill the time as well.
Well, hey, I wanted to bring up weightlifting in general, specifically calling out Jordan Peterson's claim, which he didn't make, but he's espoused that weightlifting is the number one thing that you can do to slow cognitive decline because of the way it oxygenates your brain and makes you work. And if you have any thoughts on that, as well as just what your kind of regimen or thought process is for weightlifting, Olympic or otherwise.
Yeah, so I was I got certified as an Olympic weightlifting coach back in the day. I certainly went through the CrossFit phase, high reps, high intensity, and I ended up injuring my shoulder. I probably ended up. I probably would have had arthritis in my shoulder based upon gymnastics. Being on the rings, being 185 pounds.
Oh yeah, bro. I get on the rings at CrossFit and it's not pretty.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine like doing a handstand and then dropping out of the handstand into like a giant swing, they call it, and so all of that pressure is on your shoulders, especially when you're learning. But that being said, I had an acute injury through CrossFit, and so now I have a bone spur in my left shoulder that I have to work around. So my philosophy on weight training has changed significantly, probably over the last 10 years, and I'm much more of a generalist when it comes to weightlifting. So I lift now. I don't necessarily believe in one modality. In other words, I don't believe in like, oh, you got to do kettlebells, or oh, you only should do powerlifting, or I know a lot of old powerlifters that don't lift anymore because they're so injured and beat up. They've ripped their pecs. They've got quad tears. They've got hip problems, hip replacements. So there's a difference between training for sport and training for health. And if you roll with somebody and they go, hey man, you need to work on your strength, then I would say, hey, you know what? You should probably take a block of time and really work strength. And I would probably look at a program like Starting Strength. I think Starting Strength is probably the best beginner's program because it essentially runs linear periodization and it runs it out. So in other words, you start out at a manageable weight with big lifts, and then you just increase it every time you go out and you train, and you're just increasing it by 5 pounds, then 1 pound, and then a half a pound, and you're kind of going up until you run that out. I think it's a great way to train to get strong. I'm sort of at a point right now where what's strong enough, where I see a lot of guys get into weightlifting, and then weightlifting becomes the goal. So it's like, oh, I got to get my bench up to 400 pounds, or I got to get my squat up to. And I guess my question there is, at what cost, right? So if I'm really focused on, why am I weightlifting? What's the reason I'm weightlifting? Well, for me, it's injury prevention, right? It's strength in combative endeavors. It's so that I could pummel and maybe win that pummel, you know. But I'm certainly not doing it so that I could brag about my bench press or my squat or my deadlift. So, you know, a lot of people get focused on that as a proxy for other things. So, or, you know, you get people who are competitive and they get into weightlifting, and all of a sudden that lifting more weight becomes the goal. And the price a lot of times is injury, right? So the price is I blew out my back. I need a hip replacement. I need a shoulder operation. You know, I ripped my back. And then so the you know, if the main reason why you started to do it is an adjunct to your other training, then make sure it's an adjunct to your other training. So right now I do kind of a program that I sort of made up myself, and essentially what I do is I lift 3 days a week. I do a bunch of accessory work as a warm up. So I warm up. I do look it up on YouTube. It's called rope flow. It's a thicker rope. You're not jumping over the rope. You're swinging the rope in figure eights and a lot of different ways. I just find it amusing. I do it for 5 minutes, and then I'll do like a circuit of weighted glute ham raise sit ups, and I have a gym in my basement too. And I'll do weighted glute ham raise sit ups. I'll do TRX rows because I can't do pull ups because of my shoulders. I'll do internal external rotation with a band for my shoulder, you know, small muscles of the shoulder. I'll do the TRX rows. I'll do with a weighted vest, like a 100-pound weighted vest. I'll do landmine where I just prop a bar in a corner, throw a bunch of weight on the end of the bar, and I'll do landmine presses or push presses. I can't go straight overhead, but I could do it at about 45 degrees. I'll do heavy kettlebell swings. I'll do goblet squats, and that's basically my warm up. I'll just do one set. So by the end of the week, after 3 lifting sessions, I'll do curls, and I, you know, it sounds stupid, but I do it for jujitsu, and I'm you know, working biceps, obviously doing the TRX row as well. But I just do one set, and it doesn't take me all that long to do it. When I'm done with that set, I'll do 2 main lifts. So when I'm done with that circuit, I'll do 2 main lifts. And the 2 main lifts I'm doing right now are bench press and deadlift. And it's conventional deadlift and you know, a powerlifting type of bench press. And I'll go. Monday is heavy. Tuesday is light, and Monday is heavy. Wednesday is light, and Friday is medium. And so light is 65%, medium is like 75%, and heavy is starting at 85% and working your way up to sets of singles. So Friday I'll do 5 singles, going, just kind of trying to see if I could set a new PR, and then I'll use that PR to calculate the next go around, or I'll change the modality. So instead of doing deadlifts, I'll do hex bar deadlifts. Instead of doing bench press, I'll do floor presses, or I'll do incline presses. So I kind of change that up, but all in all, it takes me about 45 minutes to get through it. Maybe, you know, through the actual workout. Sometimes it takes 30 to 45 minutes. After I lift, right now, I'll either do cardio. I'll do like a LSD session of cardio, or I'll do intervals. And right now, I'm on an 8-week block where I'm doing Airdyne. So I just hop on the Airdyne, and I do intervals, and I still do 2 to 3 LSD sessions a week. You know, just nice, light, and easy. They really don't strain the system, so they're easy to do. And that's kind of it. That's my thing with weightlifting. It's quick. It keeps me, you know, if I'm not losing strength, I'm good to go. I'm not trying to break, like when I say PRs, I'm not trying to break records anymore. I don't care. I think it's arbitrary, right? And then when people come up with like, oh, you have to have, in order to be competitive, you have to have a double body weight. Okay, Marcelo Garcia, one of the most storied and one of the best grapplers ever, never weightlifted. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't know what his bench press is and what his deadlift is. I'm not saying you shouldn't. All I'm saying is that he never did, and it didn't affect his performance. So I think when we start to put numbers on that stuff, like who gives a crap? I mean, don't pressure yourself like that way. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're gonna injure yourself by trying to push too hard. Get strong. Certainly get starting strength, get strong. That's great. Translate that strength into your sport or into your endeavor. And when you have enough, and maintaining is always gaining, right? Because atrophy or entropy always happens, right? So as you
Oh man,
older,
let me tell you,
yeah. So
it doesn't take much of an injury for you to really put a dent in your schedule and what you were doing. I recently had an injury, and coming back from that was just like it was like starting over. Now it wasn't as hard as the first time around, but
yeah,
yeah. And definitely, I would, anybody listening, I would give my own caution. I'm a bit of a competitive person.
yeah.
That bit me in the ass when I started doing CrossFit.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I had a couple injuries right up front. They were minor, thank goodness. And I just had another one here recently, and it was. I think it was just from working a little too hard. It wasn't like I was trying to do some crazy deadlift or anything, but it was too much volume of work for the weight that we were working with that day. And I have to check my ego at the door and just go work. And I like your talking about the heart rate thing, because I mean, there's guys there that are doing whatever and they're half my age and they're killing it, and that good for them. I wear a watch with a heart rate monitor on it just to keep an idea of where I'm at, because I have a stop point. I like to have like kind of that coasting high rev mark too, but I've got a spot where I just stop for a minute, because
Yeah.
it's no longer effective. I'm actually putting myself in a danger spot.
Yeah, I mean, they call it gray zone training, and when you're actually, actually you get your best benefits from working either really hard or really light. And in the middle, you're really not, physiologically, you're really not deriving as many benefits as you would think you are. And you get sloppy, and you're just really
Yep.
not, physiologically, you're not doing what you need to do to enhance your health or your fitness, or any of the parameters you're really looking to enhance. Ironically, it's kind of like either working kind of low or working really hard. But that middle zone is where, honestly, it's where most people work, and it just that's what burns people out. They're working too hard to get adaptations, the low end adaptations, and they're working too light to get the high end adaptations. They're just sort of like in the middle of doing nothing. So that's that's kind of a way to think of it.
Hey, Larry, Aaron here. Now, with all of this defund the police and police hate and propaganda towards law enforcement, as practitioners of jiu-jitsu, we know, how effective control of an aggressor with even some simple jiu-jitsu skills, how effective it is, and how safe it can be beyond even the less lethal tools that police officers use. And also, we know how effective a simple rear naked choke could be to just slow someone down, and at the end of the confrontation, they're just fine. So, what would your thoughts be, and suggestions on how to get more LE and jiu-jitsu, and how important do you think it is for the LE community?
Yeah. Okay. So two comments on this. One is I think it's hugely important, and two is I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It is an uphill battle. I understand.
Yeah, and it's not the administration. It's that, I taught defensive tactics for the Illinois State Police for a number of years, um, and to try to get some cop who's working on the street to do defensive tactics, with the injury potential and the fact that they leave the academy and they're all jacked up and they're in good shape, and then they do a year of patrol where they're eating out at diners, in their shift, and they're working a midnight shift or they're working an afternoon shift and getting crappy sleep and eating poorly, and it's affecting their exercise, and so they start to get out of shape, and they also start to get salty, where they believe they kind of know everything because they survived up to this point. It's really hard. It would be almost impossible to get these guys, to get them on a mat and get them working. I think it's got to start at the academy. And if it was up to me, what I would do is day one of whatever police academy you're in, you're a white belt and you're training jiu-jitsu, and every day you're training for an hour. You're doing mild PT as part of your jiu-jitsu class, but you're doing jiu-jitsu, and you're doing shooting, which eventually leads into evolutions, which eventually leads into into pressure testing your stuff. But so I think that's the way you do it, and then you kind of string a jiu-jitsu school into your police station, or if your academy is like Chicago Police Academy, if it's in your city, you have a jiu-jitsu class where people could come back and take it. I think that's that's a good solution. A lot of people try to distill jiu-jitsu into the defensive paradigm. And so they say, hey, you know what? I mean, I'm going to go do jujitsu, but I'm never going to mount somebody because that involves me putting hooks in, or I'm not going to back mount somebody because if I put hooks in, then I'm going to be attached to that person. I can't get away from them. And, if it's a multiple subject fight, I'm going to get kicked in the head. And it just doesn't work that way, because when you're training jujitsu, even if you're training sport jujitsu, and I'm going to put that in quotes, even if you're training sport jujitsu, you're developing attributes, and it's those attributes that you develop that actually make you good on the ground, right? It's not the move. It's not how to jump into knee on belly. It's the fact that you could do it in context and you understand when to do it. And that all comes from rolling. And if you're limiting your jiu-jitsu when you're sparring, you're going to get crushed every time. You're never going to have an opportunity to do anything offensive because you're limiting that jiu-jitsu and you're going to get crushed. So I think you have to do jiu-jitsu. I think you just have to do it. You can't just say, I'm going to do jiu-jitsu for self-defense, because it's bullshit. So you're not going to learn those attributes. Now, clearly you take those skills, and then once you develop those skills to a blue or purple belt level, you kind of philosophically take what Craig has done and filter that jiu-jitsu. Now it's way easier to tell a person who really knows jiu-jitsu, hey, don't do that. You know what you're doing with your hands? Don't do that. It's way easier to explain that than it is to go, all right, listen, when he's on the ground and you're in this thing called side control, you're never going to teach somebody that. You take a jiu-jitsu athlete and you take them through ECQC. Once the light bulb turns on, they're going to be killing. You take a gun guy and you put them in an ECQC context where they're grappling, they're going to get their shit handed. So,
well, Larry, go ahead. I'm sorry, buddy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say to add a little perspective to this is I'm a 3-stripe blue belt. So hopefully sometime this year, that's at least my goal, to get my purple. So I'm at that mid-range level where I see so much efficacy, even in just being a white belt with with 6 months to a year experience for law enforcement. But you said something that I really keyed in on. I was having a discussion on AWS's Coffee with Rich show with Rich Brown, and he said it exactly like you did, and I can't agree more. If you learn how to control somebody in any fashion in jiu-jitsu or wrestling, and even if it's sports based, you're learning control, but you're also learning it close to 100%, capacity or 100% effort at times. So, I mean, and then just dialing it back, you hit on ECQC. It seems like every person that I see very successful in ECQC, they have jiu-jitsu. And it's not just because jiu-jitsu is the end all be all. It's because of all the attributes that you hit on. And I definitely really like that philosophy. And man, I know sometimes we're kind of preaching to the choir, but another thing that I said on that show was we repeat a lot of things on our show. And it's because we're not just wanting to hear ourselves repeat ourselves. We want to say things so that they become lexicon. They become a part of all of our audience members' lexicon, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I mean, it's kind of riffing off of what you just said. Craig, jiu-jitsu is certainly developmental. It's really, really important. Craig describes what he does as using a wrestling base. I think that, clearly somebody who has a good base in wrestling is going to do really well in ECQC as well. Underhooks, ties, all these things are based off of wrestling. Jiu-jitsu, the things, going back to what you said earlier, the things that almost every video that you see that turns into some sort of deadly shooting, it started with some sort of lack of control. It started with the cop. Not only is a lack of control, but it's obvious that they're not used to working against resistance. The way I described it to some of my friends, who train, is we look at each other and we go, that would have been fun. It wouldn't have turned into a shooting that was nationwide news.
Yeah.
It would have been a fun little thing that we just did and we talked about later on. It would have, nobody would have ever seen it because it never would have escalated, because we would have had control over that person way before it got, dangerous. And, so ultimately it's it's not only that, but it's also the mental attitude of going against a live resisting person who has free will. When you go to your first class, white belt, blue belt, you're dealing with human aggression on a daily basis. It's funny. My son was a wrestler in high school. He was a really good wrestler. He's does jiu-jitsu right now. Is really accomplished in his competition. Well, he's accomplished in his competition because he wrestled, 80, 90 competitive matches a year, for 10, 15 years. And, we were talking about fighting and I said to him, I go, I don't care if you're a football player, as a wrestler, every day for hours on end, you're dealing with human aggression. You're dealing with somebody who wants to kick your ass. And that's not the case in football. It doesn't matter if you're blocking somebody or whatever. You're not dealing with that same type of human aggression. In wrestling, you're dealing with skilled human aggression, right? And in jiu-jitsu, you're dealing with skilled human aggression. And as much as we like to couch it in respect and blah 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 blah, you're trying to make that other person tap. You're trying to dominate that other person, and so that mental attitude and that mental framework to not be intimidated by physical violence comes from experience. Well, it's pretty hard to gain that experience. And what we start to learn with YouTube and all this other stuff is that little myth that we used to hear about the street fighter, Johnny down the block, he's a freaking awesome street fighter, turns out to be complete bullshit. Johnny down the block just ended up being the first guy to throw the punch. And it was a really shitty punch, John Wayne style, from, his back. So there was no experienced street fighter. There's nobody who's getting 80 street fights a year in, unless they're a complete asshole. But they're not, they're not fighting that much. And if they are, they're drunk all the time and they're not learning from that. And, jiu-jitsu and combat sports give you that ability to deal with that aggression in a sport on a daily basis. That's why when people start talking about, and this doesn't happen much anymore, but, back in the day, it used to be like, oh yeah, that's sport. It's not street. It's not for the street. You still hear jiu-jitsu guys talk about this. I'm shocked sometimes by jiu-jitsu guys. I had a brown belt that I took into we did essentially a car fighting block and at a seminar, and it was a Filipino-based martial arts seminar. And I just took him in the car. Instead of using a gun, I threw a knife in there. And I had a jiu-jitsu brown belt. It was a skilled kid, and he was getting dominated by some dude in the car. And the guy had no grappling experience. And I pulled him aside. I'm like, Paul, what the hell is going on? Why are you getting dominated here? And he's like, well, I'm trying, and he's naming Filipino techniques. And I'm like, hey, dude, forget about the Filipino knife fighting thing. Think of this as a grappling problem. So next time you go in the car, think of it as grappling, not as knife fighting. He went in there, and from that point forward, he had the mental switch, and bam, he's now dominating everybody in the car. So, even on that end, I have to kind of throw out there, Scott Oates, Craig and I have been talking, and I'm going to be teaching for Shivworks with Scott. Scott's a black belt, teaches with Craig. He's a black belt under Salo Ribeiro. And
he's awesome.
He's third degree, and his jiu-jitsu is unbelievable. And he's a retired
former SEAL, correct?
Former SEAL, retired SEAL,
Yep.
And so we're gonna teach a class. We're gonna teach a class under the Shivworks banner, and it's gonna be to MMA and BJJ schools to let them reclaim self-defense. So essentially,
that's awesome.
Yeah, taking that Shivworks paradigm and then translating it to jiu-jitsu guys. Because, I see so many jiu-jitsu schools that bring in like a Grama guy for the self-defense portion. And it drives me freaking insane. I mean, it drives me insane when they bring a guy in like that, So we want to kind of reclaim that. So we're going to be teaching under, it's going to be a Shivworks class. We've talked to Craig about it for a number of years. Craig's a one band show, and it's kind of hard to scale the business when almost every weekend you're doing the road show. So
and Larry, I have said to him multiple times, I've hosted him, and we as a business have hosted him multiple times. And I start getting concerned about Craig being on the road all the time. So we've kind of been prodding him. It's like, hey, some of these collective guys, they probably need to be picking up the mantle a little bit. And frankly, we're trying to do a little bit of that on our more, I wouldn't call it amateur scale, but on the lower scale with Craig's permission. But what I'll say is I cannot wait for that class, Larry. If you guys are going to be going around doing that, we'll host you guys for that. At least in my area and or maybe in Tulsa too.
No, that's great. Yeah. We, so I was just talking to Craig yesterday again, and we were talking about, a lot of instructors who have 14 different classes, right? So, and Craig has like this year, he's only teaching like two or three different type of classes. He really has like 5 classes that he teaches, It's a very, very limited range of classes. And so, we're going to slowly roll this out. We don't, I believe in this philosophy as well as, the bottom line is that we want the best product we can get for the students. So Scott and I are developing it right now, and we'll probably roll it out towards the end of the year, and we'll do some beta testing on it, and then we'll open it up to the roadshow. So I would say probably next year we'll book as many classes as we can. But yeah, it'll all be through Shivworks. So that's something to look forward to. But
that's great news. Great news.
And it's like bringing it back. This would be something that hopefully we could translate to police. Certainly, there's some police agencies that are that see the benefit of it. I think the potential injury rate. Like I took my undercover. I ran an undercover unit for 5.5 years, and I took my undercovers through a car fighting portion and injured 3 of them. So, I don't know. I don't know if you're not hitting them in the academy. I don't know if there's a utility in bringing it in like to a 40-year-old street cop who's been working for 15 years on the street. I don't know if you're gonna change anything for him. But certainly for a kid in the academy, just going to the academy, I think you can make a huge impact by getting him on the right path. So so that's kind of my thoughts on that, and we're all on the same page with this. So a little shameless plug for further Shivworks stuff coming.
Amazing.
Can't wait. So, Larry, I think we've used up way more time than we had expected to with you. So we want to be respectful of your time. So it looks like we're going to have you back on, especially with the Shivworks guys. We got so much more to talk about with you if you'd be willing to come back on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
With that said, Aaron's got one last question.
All right, Larry, this is a real important part of our show. I'd like to ask you, what are your top 3 favorite musical artists or bands?
That's hysterical. So, okay. All right. AC/DC. Got to get a little Thunderstruck in there. Nothing to get you pumped up like AC/DC.
Yeah.
I saw Eddie Vedder at Ohana Fest working a job in a very small venue. It was actually on a beach, but there was probably 100 people there, and I was right at the stage, and he was absolutely amazing. I liked Pearl Jam back in the day, and
cool.
Hearing Eddie Vedder do an acoustic set was amazing. I got to see him a couple times in very, very small venues. So certainly Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder. And then, I modern stuff, I don't know, Beastie Boys maybe, and that's not modern, but, like the Beastie Boys, like the Stones, like a little of the Ramones. So it depends on what I'm in the mood for.
Awesome. Well, it's one of our favorite topics, and, it's been said, don't trust anyone that doesn't like to crank up music in their car.
Yeah, that's so true.
So we got to get that. We got to get that out there. What you guys dig. So,
man, it's been great. This is awesome information both for us and our audience. We really, really appreciate your time, buddy. Incredible information.
Hey guys, it was great talking to you guys. You guys are great. I mean, really good questions and good discussion.
Nice,
awesome,
it,
brother.
Man.
Well, we'll go ahead and bid you good night, Larry. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time, buddy.
Take it easy, guys.
What a great interview, man. That I really enjoyed all that stuff about the athletics and fitness stuff conversation that we had. I know some of our listeners may have gotten a little lost in some of that, and maybe kind of zoned out. But for me, that was huge. That was my favorite part of that deal, and that's a perfect transition to take us into accountability, because that's a lot of what we're talking about here in accountability is that kind of stuff. So I'll go ahead and kick it off. I had 2 jiu-jitsu classes and 3 CrossFit classes this week, so I'm back to my Monday to Friday schedule. So I've got my Jiu-Jitsu gym offers a 6 a.m. class, so I'm able to get in twice a week before work, and the other 3 days I get the CrossFit early, and I do that. I do that. I'm the up before the enemy, man. I'm doing the 4:45 get up, and it makes a huge difference. I worked out in the evening for the first few years I was in CrossFit, but this is really working out better for me in the way that my energy flows and the way I'm able to make it through the day. And I feel like I have more to give once I'm kind of awake and rolling there too. It does. The first few minutes is sometimes tough, but I'm heading into jiu-jitsu tomorrow morning, by the way, too. So
awesome.
I have gotten a few rolls in that path gi, and I am waiting. We're gonna do a host-only show here before long, and I'll do a little more in-depth breakdown review on that path gi. Aaron has one on order as well.
I sure do.
So we'll be able to tag team that a little bit. This week I do sadly report that I did not shoot this week.
Boo.
Boo, but
Yeah.
I can't say boo too much though.
Yeah. We're just playing anyway.
Yeah, it's all good. I do prefer to shoot each week, but there are weeks where things happen, and like this week I got 2 flights in, so I was able to do and I got another short solo on one of those flights, getting prepped for my written test and my check ride. I got an affirmation statement for my written test, and I'll share about that after, I think, as opposed to laying the groundwork. We'll talk about it when I get through that. But
excellent.
It was a great week, and I got a lot accomplished. And one thing I find is when I schedule myself the way I have, where I'm doing my Monday through Friday workouts, and I've got these other activities like 3 to 4 nights a week, there is not a lot of free time for me to just be idle. And it's amazing to me. I fit in podcasts during the day. I drive a lot for my job, so I'm able to do that, kind of get that learning stuff in. But it has been difficult for me to find the time to study for my private pilot written because of the amount of things that I have scheduled out. So I am shifting some of that time, like the shooting time I may have spent, to that. So hopefully this isn't a recurring theme, but it is, it's a balancing act, man. So that's about all I'm going to share this week.
Sounds good, Eric. I'll go first. How about that?
Go for it, brother.
Between the tactical twins here. Well, so this week, man, I've been working my butt off at work. Maybe I've mentioned this before on other shows, but I am an accountant. I like to say that I am the first and only rock guitar player that moonlights as an accountant. But a 20-year career in accounting, boy, sometimes I start thinking, man, what's the next thing here? Especially after a week like this week. But I am thankful for my job. It's a good job. I'm thankful for my college degree that led to it. But boy, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm gonna chill out one of these days. Okay, so beyond work, it's kind of slowed me down on a couple of things, but I have been doing my same exercise routine. You guys know about it. It's pretty simple, but I've been keeping that up. And adding to that, I have been doing some intermittent fasting, which it's been a while since I've done that. That just makes you...
Good work.
Yeah, that just makes you feel a little better about... Just that extra discipline. There's that aspect, and then there's of course the fact that it actually does make you feel better. So,
well, Aaron, if I can add to that, you guys can both agree with this. If you do agree, that is, when I intermittent fast, I stop feeling as hungry between meals. Mm-hmm. It does in fact reset your hunger hormones, and that's, I think, one of the best aspects of it is it teaches you that you're not really hungry and you don't feel the hunger pains like you do when you're eating a lot, or meaning, eating 3-4 meals a day. And I think that's a really good aspect of it. Go ahead, buddy.
Well, yeah, again, I'm glad to be doing that. I have an affirmation statement regarding my diet and exercise myself, so I'm staying on top of that. Now, again, since I'm so busy, I only made it to Jits once this week, but it was a night where it was humid and I just got super sweaty, and I thought, okay, it's time to get a little bit less hot gi set up. So I, that night, went home and ordered a path gi like Brian just mentioned earlier. It's just a little bit lighter material than my Axiom. Boy, I love my Axiom, but I thought it'd be time to get another gi from Origin. Eric, you have a gi that's the same material as the Path, right? And am I right? It's a little bit lighter than the Axiom.
Yeah, so it's a little lighter, but it may feel like it isn't. It actually breathes more. You can actually, and yeah, it's my Jocko Def gi, and if you hold it to light, you can kind of see through it. The way that it's weaved, it's their smart pearl weave, and yeah, it's comfortable as heck. It's going to take a couple of washes to feel real comfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's awesome. You'll
cool.
love it.
And if anyone's seen that Path gi, the graphic on the back of that
badass.
That's brilliant. How it basically just weaves from white to red, and the colors bleed together as if you're going in and out of different rankings.
Yep.
You're picking
really
up
cool.
You're picking up some purple as your blue. Just so on and so forth. It's just super cool. Hence the Path. And just one more thing too. I went ahead and got their short sleeve 1776 rash guard, so I'm stoked to have that. Now, for dry fire, which is, for me, that's all the shooting I've done, which is dry fire. Yeah, this week I decided I would save some ammo. I have been shooting every week for the last few weeks, getting ready for the Tom Givens instructor development course that unfortunately got canceled. So I got that rescheduled for October. So I thought I'd give myself an ammo break this week, but I've been dry firing every single day, and I'm trying to hit 30 minutes a day. So one of the things I've been working on the last few days is something that I learned from, again, one of our guests, Scott Jadlinski, is how to push your draw. And so I set a par time of 1.3, which, I mean, to some people that may not be super fast, but that's really pushing me. And it's a technique of setting that par time, and you're looking for two things. You're making sure that you're trying to beat that par time and see the dot. It's not all about having an accurate trigger press. It's about getting that out there and covering what is the 80-20 concept that he teaches too. And let me tell you guys, if you've heard him speak too, he's got what he calls the wave technique of acquiring the dot, and that last little bit of the presentation. Man, I'm telling you, it's no surprise that he is teaching all over the country to lots of legit people and agencies, because that one technique, I'm telling you, after working on my normal presentation and acquiring the dot and still having that little bit of wiggle out at the end, and then trying this wave technique where you're basically rolling over, slightly over, and letting that dot settle down from 12 o'clock. It's so easy to get that dot, and it settles way quicker, actually, or even almost nearly perfectly when you're using that pinky technique, which is what I think he labels at the wave, with that wave motion as you pull that pinky in. And Eric, didn't you say that that Paul Sharp has been talking about pinky pressure as controlling recoil too, right?
Oh yeah, he's actually talked about that for quite a few years, and I believe he said that the pinky of the support hand is the most important part of recoil management.
Wow.
I believe I'm quoting him correct, and he can let me know if I'm incorrect about that. But I believe I've heard him say that.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I think that is it for me this week, guys.
Good man.
Good stuff, brother. So I guess I'll take it. So I've had only 3 dry fire sessions this week, but I've been very, very disciplined in working just micro drills this week. I know, Aaron, you've been talking about that. The Ben Stoger book. I grabbed that and started focusing on that again. So all I was doing was micro drills, drawing to get my front sight, no press. I also would work similar, Brian, to like the trigger press drills that we did with Gabe White. Man, those are great micro drills. Getting the magazine as quickly as possible to the magazine well. Those are the primary things that I've been working on, and it's amazing when you break your techniques out into those micro drills, you will see vast improvement very quick. So, yes, nice. So that's been my dry fire focus. I've had 3 early morning workouts this week at a really cool CrossFit gym where I'm currently at. And man, Brian, I thought of you when I first walked into that gym. I was like, man, this is an amazing gym. and also, nice. I'll digress a second too. I also thought of you when we were going to have Larry on, because I knew you'd really enjoy his fitness acumen. So I have not been to jiu-jitsu this week because of where I'm at. But I believe that I'm going to get to a open mat. There's a club here that just got to go back on the mat. Unfortunately, when they had their open mat, I was still working. So I think I'm going to make it there at least in the next few days when I see them post their next open mat. So
cool.
I did bring a gi. I'm sitting there looking at my Axiom gi, so it's ready to go. As far as jiu-jitsu, however, I still have been training. You know how I've been training, guys?
Videos.
Visualization and videos. Yep.
Nice.
And that
Good
is
work.
And that is training, as we've always talked about on here. So audience members, if you're not able to make it to a class, open up your videos, because you are getting visual and mental repetitions when you're watching that. So,
hey, I want to interject. Last night, I was watching some of my testing videos. I forgot about that.
Awesome. And I owe you guys some as well, by the way, offline. So, as far as something that I've picked up on, and I know this has made you happy, Aaron, is I've really stepped it up in my drumming. Now that we're
nice.
in the new house, and I've got that new incredible kit, I'm just really, really invigorated again in my drumming. And there's not been a day that I have not started with rudiments on my practice pad and practice at least for 30 minutes or more. And I think I told you this in a text, Aaron. I admit that I was a pretty accomplished drummer in my young days, and I've been far from that. But I really believe with the diligent practice and almost like riding a bike, that I'm going to surpass my younger self here pretty soon.
Cool.
I think. So I'm pretty pumped about my drumming. So
well,
I thought I'd bring that up.
And I think we alluded to this before. Doing those rudiments on a practice pad, that's full on the same concept of dry fire.
Absolutely.
You get good at shooting in dry fire. You get great at drumming through rudiments on a practice pad, or your rudiments on a snare. But it's just always nice to not have to beat the crap out of your ears with the snare drum when you're doing 1,000 paradiddles.
Yeah, and the wife, as much as she supports me in my drumming, that's another reason why I spend a ton of time on my practice pad, is so that she's not having to listen to an hour of drums.
Rock on, rock on.
So a lot easier to hear my metronome too, because that's crucial with your rudiments too.
Amen.
Making sure you're doing it with a metronome. So, but with that said, fellas, I think that's good for me this week.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It's been fun talking. I think, we've all had kind of a tight week, but, we're here for accountability and we are still working. So, working on the things that we espouse here. So it's fun hearing what you guys have been up to this week.
And Aaron, I'll also add to it, sometimes we beat up on ourselves if we're not able to get to our trident, task, which is the shooting, the jiu-jitsu, and the workouts. Those are the three main things we should be doing. But man, sometimes we're not going to get to it. And I will digress. That's one thing I did forget, is I did shoot with my special operations neighbor. Man, I won't go deep into it because we're kind of long. I can talk about it a little more the next time. But guys, man, I had a blast. The carbine and pistol mixed in with CrossFit with these specimens of neighbors, man. They're in incredible shape. They're going to be an excellent set of new training partners. So I'm pretty pumped about it.
All right.
And at a private range where we can do whatever we want there. Yeah, there's running and gunning, whatever we want to do. It's really cool.
Awesome.
So now I'm done.
Fair enough. Well, we haven't really been prescribing a drill, and part of that's lack of ammo. Part of it's our busyness on our end too. But I would encourage anyone to do some of that extra draw practice. Obviously practice the safe practice on the on your dry fire drills. Make sure there's no live ammo in the area or room that you're practicing in, but do some extra draws, do some site acquisition like we talked about before, and and Aaron alluded to earlier. Do the drill where you find your dot. If you're shooting a dot, do more of that, because all of those repetitions are just going to lead to better shots on paper when you take the shots. So that's all I got for you.
I thought about it earlier too. One last thing from me is that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are really astute and have really good dry fire acumen, but to some of the shooters out there that are kind of new to dry fire, like for instance, I've got a friend that was saying he was dry firing, but he got tired of cycling his slide. And I go, man, probably not even half of my dry fire, more than half of my dry fire, I don't pull my trigger at all. There's so much you can work on with a pistol and dry fire where you don't have to pull the trigger. Just kind of a tip out there.
Well, and I'd like to add one last thing about the drill. And yeah, we haven't been prescribing, but I am going to prescribe a drill probably the next show. But I think we talked about this a little while back. I think I'd like to start making it a monthly drill, because we're going to plan to shoot each week when we can. But I think that'll take a little of the pressure off of our audience members if they're trying to keep up with every single weekly drill we put out, or bi-weekly, I should say. But what do you guys think about that? Just going to where we emphasize it as a month.
Sounds perfect to me.
Yeah. I like it.
It'll help us too, because we know that we've gotten to the point where sometimes one of us won't be able to get to it just because of our schedules. So I'll be ready with one next episode for the audience out there.
Sounds good. Well, you guys want to call it a night?
Let's call it a night.
Wonderful talking to you guys.
Care. Oh yeah, great time. Take care, Brian. Right. Take care, Aaron.
All right.
Talk to you next time.